The wind tore across the empty plains like a pack of wild coyotes, whistling through the skeletal trees and whipping the frozen snow into miniature storms that danced across the ground. The old cabin sat like a lonely sentinel atop the hill, its wooden planks gray and weathered, chattering under the weight of the relentless winter. Only the howl of the wind and the occasional bark of a distant coyote broke the silence. It was the kind of place most men avoided, especially in a winter like this. But for Sam Harper, it was the only home left he could claim. Sam had been riding for hours, his boots crunching against the hard-packed snow, his faithful dog, Buck, padding beside him. The border of the forest was near, and the snow had deepened here, clinging to his coat and frosting his eyelashes. He had come to the cabin on a hunch, following a map he'd bought from a traveling trader, an old map marked with a circle and a note, "Abandoned but strong." To Sam, that meant shelter, warmth, and solitude. The last thing he wanted was company, though Buck, with his golden fur matted with snow, was company enough. The cabin's door protested with a loud creak when Sam pushed it open, the sound echoing into the empty interior. Inside, the air smelled of old pine and a faint, lingering smoke that spoke of someone who had once lived here, someone long gone. A few broken chairs lay strewn across the floor, and the hearth was cold, its ashes gray and brittle. Sam stepped inside, brushing snow from his coat. Buck followed, sniffing the floor and growling lowly at a shadow in the corner. Sam set about making the cabin habitable. He built a small fire, stacked what dry wood he could find, and lit a lantern that cast a golden glow over the room. Snowflakes clung to the edges of the windows, but inside, for the first time in weeks, Sam felt a spark of warmth. He and Buck curled up near the hearth, the dog's body a comforting weight against his leg. The first night was quiet, too quiet. The wind outside seemed endless, pounding against the cabin like a drum. Sam listened to the groan of the old beams, telling himself that he was alone. And yet, sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he thought he heard something else, a faint scratching at the walls, soft and deliberate, like claws against wood. But when he opened his eyes, nothing stirred. Only the fire crackled and Buck's steady breathing filled the silence. By the third day, the snow had grown deeper, burying the small path that led to the cabin. Sam moved through the forest carefully, looking for wood and game, but the wilderness had been generous with little. He spotted deer tracks frozen into the snow, but they led him nowhere. The wind was unrelenting, and even Buck seemed cautious, his ears flicking at every sound. But it was on this third day that Sam discovered something that would change everything. He was returning to the cabin, dragging a fallen pine to use as firewood, when he saw it, a small figure, crouched near a frozen stream, moving like a shadow between the trees. At first, Sam thought it might be a deer, or perhaps one of the wolves he'd seen tracks of. But as he crept closer, he realized it was a boy. Thin, pale, and ragged. His hair wild as if spun from the very snow that surrounded him. His eyes sharp and alert. He wore only scraps of cloth, fur-lined in some parts, but it was clear he had survived by living off the land. The boy froze when he saw Sam, crouching low, his hands clenched like claws. Buck growled softly, stepping in front of Sam, but the boy made no move to flee. There was a wildness to him, a raw strength that spoke of years spent surviving without human care. Sam raised a hand, speaking gently. "Hey there. It's all right. I won't hurt you." The boy didn't answer. His eyes darted to Buck, then back to Sam, calculating. He was small for his age, probably no more than 12, but his movements were quick, precise, and confident. It was obvious. He knew the forest, the snow, and the cold better than any man could. Sam slowly set down the pine, careful not to seem threatening. "I got a cabin not far from here. Warm fire, food," he offered. "You can come with me, if you want." The boy hesitated, his breath misting in the frigid air. Then, as if deciding the risk was worth the reward, he took a small step forward. And then another. By the time Sam reached him, the boy was only a few feet away. Buck sniffed cautiously, tail wagging slightly, and the boy held out a hand, not in greeting, but to test, to sense if the dog was a threat. Buck sniffed and backed off, sensing no danger. The boy's lips quirked slightly, a hint of a smile breaking through the frost that lined his face. That night, back at the cabin, Sam offered the boy what little food he had, dried meat, hard bread, and water. The boy ate quickly, ravenously, as if he hadn't had a proper meal in weeks. Sam watched quietly, his eyes tracing the sharp angles of the boy's face, the untamed streak of hair, and the wary glint in his eyes. He wondered where the boy had come from, how he had survived so long in the forest. The boy ate in silence, occasionally glancing at Buck, who lay nearby, alert and watchful. After the meal, Sam built another small fire closer to the boy. "Name's Sam," he said softly. "And this here is Buck. You got a name." The boy hesitated, then whispered something unintelligible. Sam caught it as Coda, though he wasn't sure. "Coda," he repeated slowly. The boy nodded. That was enough for Sam. Through the long night, Sam listened to the wind howl outside, wrapping the cabin in a cocoon of frozen darkness. Coda slept near the fire, huddled in a blanket Sam had retrieved from an old chest. Buck lay between them, as if guarding both men from the biting cold. And in that small cabin, amidst the endless snow and frozen silence, a fragile trust began to form, a trust between a man who had sought solitude and a boy who had known only the wild. By morning, the boy was awake before Sam, staring out the window at the endless whiteness of the plains. Sam watched him quietly, noticing how the boy's eyes traced the horizon, how he seemed to read the patterns in the snow like a map. Coda turned to him, and for the first time, Sam saw fear replaced by curiosity. "Cold," the boy said simply, pointing to the snow. Sam chuckled softly, rubbing his hands together. "You ain't seen nothing yet, kid. Winter's just getting started." As the days passed, Sam learned more about Coda. The boy had survived alone for years, living with a pack of wolves in the forests that stretched beyond the mountains. He moved like them, hunted like them, and somehow understood their language of growls and gestures. Sam watched in awe as Coda demonstrated his uncanny skills, tracking deer through the snow, climbing trees with the agility of a wild cat, and moving silently across the frozen plains. Yet, despite his prowess, the boy was lonely. And Sam, who had lived through loss and hardship himself, recognized the same hunger for connection in Coda's eyes that he felt in his own heart. It wasn't easy. Coda was wary, quick to snap if he felt threatened, and stubborn in ways Sam had never encountered. But over time, the boy began to trust the old cabin, and more importantly, Sam. He learned to sleep through the night without hiding, to eat without fear, and even to speak in broken words that Sam could understand. And slowly, in the midst of the endless snow and the biting wind, an unusual family began to form. A man, a boy, and a dog, bound together not by blood, but by survival, trust, and the cold, harsh wilds of the Old West. The days grew shorter and the nights sharper. Snow piled against the cabin walls like frozen waves, and the wind carved icy paths through the trees that bordered the clearing. Sam and Coda had settled into a rhythm, though it was a fragile one. The boy had begun to speak more, muttering fragments of sentences that Sam pieced together with patience. He learned that Coda had been raised by a small wolf pack after his parents were lost to a fever years ago. The wolves had taught him how to hunt, how to read the forest, and, most importantly, how to survive. But they had not taught him words, human manners, or the warmth of companionship. That was something Coda was only beginning to discover within the small walls of the cabin. One morning, Sam awoke to find Coda gone. Panic tightened Sam's chest as he rushed outside, Buck growling and sniffing at the snow. Footprints led toward the forest, the boy's nimble tracks moving like shadows over the white blanket. Sam followed, his heart pounding. The wind cut at his face, stinging and relentless, and the forest seemed to close in around him, black and silent. But he knew Coda. The boy would have ventured toward the stream, toward the frozen cliffs where he had once hunted with the wolves. He found Coda crouched near a ridge, peering down at the edge of a frozen waterfall. Snowflakes clung to the boy's hair and eyelashes, and his breath came in sharp, visible clouds. Below, the ice glistened, cracking under the weight of unseen currents. Sam approached slowly, calling out, "Coda, don't get too close to the edge." The boy didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head, almost as if listening to the frozen wind, measuring its song. "Coda, you can fall," Sam yelled, the desperation in his voice breaking through the winter quiet. But the boy only shook his head, pointing toward the forest beyond the ridge. "Wolf," he said, his voice low and strange, almost a whisper. Sam squinted and then saw them, a pair of gray wolves moving silently through the trees, watching the boy. Sam froze. He had never seen wolves like that before. They were massive, their fur thick with snow, their eyes sharp and unyielding. And yet, Coda didn't seem afraid. The boy dropped to the snow, moving with the grace of a predator. Buck barked, low and warning, but Sam held up a hand. Coda disappeared into the trees, following the wolves' path. Sam's mind raced. He had worried about the boy leaving, feared the wild would consume him, and yet here, in the biting cold, Coda seemed at home. He realized painfully that this boy was as much a creature of the wild as he was a human child. Hours passed before Coda returned to the cabin. He was silent, carrying a small bundle of rabbits he had caught using techniques Sam couldn't even imagine. He dropped them by the fire, his eyes flicking nervously toward Sam. The man said nothing at first, simply watching. Then, slowly, he asked, "Did the wolves help you?" Coda nodded once, sharply, eyes shining with pride. "Friends," he whispered. It was the first time he had used the word in reference to anything living besides Buck. Sam felt a mix of awe and unease. This boy had lived among wolves, learned their ways, and yet he was here, in a cabin, learning what it meant to be human again. He wondered if the boy could ever truly belong to the world of men, or if he would always straddle the line between wild and tame, between forest and firelight. The next few days brought more challenges. Hunting alone was difficult, and Sam found himself teaching Coda how to use human tools: a knife, a trap, even a rifle. Coda's fingers were nimble, strong, and quick, and he adapted faster than Sam expected. Yet, the boy's mind was always half in the wild. He would pause, listen to sounds no one else could hear, sniff the wind as if it carried messages meant only for him. Sam began to see that the boy's survival wasn't just physical. It was instinct, intuition, and a bond with nature that could never be taught. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the snow-capped mountains, casting long shadows across the frozen plains, Sam heard a distant howl. Buck's ears pricked up, and Coda stiffened. Sam followed the boy outside, and together they scanned the horizon. A pack of wolves emerged from the trees, their eyes glinting in the fading light. But these weren't Coda's wolves. They were larger, more menacing, and their movements were aggressive. They approached slowly, circling the cabin as if marking territory. Sam felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. "Coda, they're dangerous," he warned. But the boy didn't hesitate. He ran toward the nearest wolf, voice rising in guttural calls, hands raised. Sam followed, unsure if he could intervene or if Coda had a chance at all. The boy's connection with the wild became immediately clear. The wolves paused, ears flicking, then approached more slowly, responding to Coda's calls. Sam watched in awe as the boy moved between the animals, mediating, guiding, and, somehow, commanding respect. By the time Sam reached him, the wolves had settled a safe distance away, watching but no longer aggressive. Coda turned, eyes bright with triumph, and Sam realized something profound. This boy was not a victim of the wild, he was its equal. That night, the cabin seemed smaller, warmer, yet more alive. Coda slept near the fire, but his dreams were restless, flickering with shadows of wolves and forests. Sam lay awake, thinking about the boy's journey. He had been handed over to the wolves by fate, or perhaps by tragedy, and had survived where most children would have perished. And now, in this cabin, surrounded by snow and wind, he was learning what it meant to live among humans again. Sam's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Buck growled, low and menacing. Sam rose cautiously, hand on the rifle he had set beside the hearth. When he opened the door, he found a traveler, a lone man, thin and shivering, his horse tied outside. "Please, warm me," the man stammered. "I've been caught in the snow for days." Sam hesitated. He had not seen another person in weeks, and the cabin was small. Yet, Coda's eyes followed the man, curious but cautious. Sam nodded, letting the man in. As they warmed themselves by the fire, Sam noticed Coda's expression change, alert, tense, protective. He could see the instincts of the wild in the boy's posture, the way he positioned himself between the stranger and the fire. The boy had learned caution, But he had also learned loyalty. He would protect this home, this fire, and the man who had sheltered him, just as he had learned to protect himself in the wild. That night, Sam realized that the cabin, once abandoned and lonely, had become something more. It was a refuge, a sanctuary, and, unexpectedly, a home. Koda was no longer a boy of the forest alone. He was part of a small, strange family, bound by survival, trust, and the snow that covered the endless plains. Yet Sam also knew that the wild was never far behind. The wolves, the storm, the endless winter. All of it was a reminder that life in the Old West was unforgiving, and the bond he had with Koda and Buck would be tested in ways he could not yet imagine. As the fire crackled and the wind moaned outside, Sam Harper settled into the cabin, feeling the weight of the past and the wild pressing against the walls. He glanced at Koda, who was tracing patterns in the snow through the window, and felt a sense of awe and trepidation. This boy, this wild child, had survived the harshest conditions imaginable. And now, together, they would face whatever the unforgiving winter of the Old West could throw at them. The wind had grown colder still, gnawing at Sam's cheeks and biting at his fingers as the snow piled higher against the cabin walls. Days blurred into nights in a white haze, and survival became a constant struggle. Food was scarce, and the frozen plains offered little in the way of game. But Sam and Koda had grown used to the rhythm of the wilderness, and Buck's presence remained a comforting constant. One morning, Sam awoke to the sound of distant gunfire, sharp cracks echoing across the frozen hills. He grabbed his rifle and peered through the frost-covered window. In the clearing below, 3 men were approaching on horseback, their faces grim, their movements deliberate. Sam's stomach tightened. Strangers in the Old West were rarely friendly, and these men were armed. He turned to Koda, who had already risen, his eyes scanning the horizon with uncanny precision. The boy's lips pressed together, and his body tensed, ready to spring into action. "They're hunters," Sam muttered, though even he didn't sound sure. "Or trouble. Could be both." Koda didn't answer, only gestured sharply for Sam to follow. Together, they moved silently toward the back of the cabin, where the forest began, their footprints disappearing under the freshly fallen snow. Buck padded quietly at their side, his ears pricked and eyes alert. The men approached the cabin, shouting over the wind, demanding entry. "Hey, open up. We know someone's in there." One of them swung a lantern, the light cutting through the stormy gray. Sam could see the malice in their eyes, the way they circled the cabin, ready for confrontation. He took a deep breath, then nodded toward Koda. The boy slipped into the trees, moving like a shadow, unseen. Sam watched as Koda disappeared among the pines, then turned to the men. "Stay back," he warned, raising his rifle, though his heart pounded with uncertainty. Minutes later, the chaos began. Koda leapt from the trees, howling like a wolf, and the men froze, caught off guard. He moved swiftly, knocking one off his horse before he could even react, using his small size and agility to his advantage. Buck barked, lunging at the other 2, teeth bared, forcing them to retreat. Sam fired warning shots into the air, the sound cutting through the storm, and the men finally realized they were outmatched, not by one man, but by a family. After the men fled, cursing and retreating into the snow, Sam exhaled, relief washing over him. Koda returned, panting but unscathed, a wild grin on his face. "Safe," the boy said simply, the word more confident now than ever before. Sam laughed softly, the tension breaking. "Yeah, kid, safe. For now." The attack had shaken them, but it also solidified the bond between man and boy. That night, huddled near the fire, Sam reflected on the boy's resilience. Koda had survived the harshest wilderness alone, and yet he had adapted to human companionship without losing himself. He was a creature of both worlds, wild and domestic, untamed yet capable of trust. Sam realized that he had been given a gift, a family, unusual and unexpected, but precious all the same. The following days brought new challenges. The storm worsened, and the snowdrifts grew taller than Sam's knees. Hunting became even more difficult, and food ran low. But Koda's instincts, honed by years among wolves, became invaluable. He led Sam to hidden caches of roots and herbs, taught him how to trap rabbits under the ice, and even guided Buck in tracking deer through the blinding snow. Sam marveled at the boy's knowledge, the way he read the signs in the wind and the footprints in the snow. Koda was not just surviving, he was thriving, and in doing so, teaching Sam the wisdom of the wild. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and crimson, Sam and Koda sat outside the cabin. Buck lay nearby, exhausted but content. The boy's hands moved deftly, carving a small figurine from a piece of driftwood he had found near the stream. Sam watched quietly, noting the careful precision, the patience, and the artistry that had been nurtured in the wilderness. "You've got talent, Koda," Sam said softly. The boy glanced up, eyes bright with pride, and nodded. "Learn from trees," he said simply, and then shrugged, as if it explained everything. Sam laughed quietly, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. The winter dragged on, but with each passing day, Koda became more comfortable in the cabin, more willing to trust, more willing to belong. The boy began to speak more, stringing together words and sentences that he had long abandoned. He laughed freely, a sound that had been foreign in the forest. He even began to help Sam with chores around the cabin, carrying firewood, mending tools, and cooking meals. The wildness remained in his eyes and movements, but it was tempered now by the bond he shared with Sam and Buck. Then, one morning, as the snow began to thaw slightly, Sam awoke to find Koda gone again. Panic rose in his chest, but this time, it was different. He followed the boy's tracks, not with fear, but with expectation. The trail led to the forest's edge, where a small group of wolves had gathered. Koda knelt in the snow, speaking softly in a language Sam didn't understand. The wolves approached, sniffing the air, tails low but relaxed. Koda's voice rose, commanding yet gentle, and the wolves responded, nuzzling him and circling protectively. Sam watched in awe. He realized then that Koda had not just survived with the wolves, he had become part of them. And now, he could bridge the gap between the wild and the human world, teaching Sam, and perhaps others, what it meant to live in harmony with nature. The cabin, once abandoned and lonely, had become a place of life, trust, and belonging. Sam had found more than shelter here, he had found family. Koda had found more than survival, he had found a home. And together, with Buck by their side, they had created a bond that could weather any storm, endure any threat, and survive the harshest winters of the Old West. By spring, the snow melted, revealing the rugged beauty of the plains. Sam, Koda, and Buck ventured beyond the cabin more often, exploring the forest, hunting together, and even marking the boundaries of their little homestead. Travelers occasionally passed through, curious about the small cabin in the snowy hills, but Koda's wild eyes and Buck's watchful stance discouraged most from lingering. Only those who were respectful, gentle, and willing to understand were welcomed. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains once more, Sam and Koda sat outside the cabin, watching the horizon. The boy leaned against Sam, and Buck rested at their feet. The wind still whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and earth, but it no longer felt threatening. It was a part of their world now, a world they had built together, a world where man, boy, and dog lived as one, surrounded by the endless wilds of the Old West. Sam looked down at Koda and smiled. "You're part of this family now, kid," he said. Koda's lips quirked into a small, confident smile, the kind that spoke of trust, belonging, and survival. "Family," the boy echoed softly, the word carrying weight beyond its meaning. In the end, the abandoned cabin had become more than shelter. It had become a home, a sanctuary, and a testament to resilience, trust, and the enduring bond between the wild and the human heart. And through the bitter cold, the endless snow, and the harsh realities of the Old West, one thing was certain: Sam, Koda, and Buck would face whatever came their way, together. The wolves howled in the distance, a haunting, beautiful song of the wild. Koda tilted his head, listening, and for the first time, he felt fully at peace. He was not alone. He was not lost. He was home.